Welcome to Stewardology, a podcast where two worlds collide. In this show, financial advisor Tim Russell and Reverend Drew Gysi come together to explore the intersection of financial stewardship and theology. Their unique perspectives help Christians and churches understand and apply a biblical framework for everyday financial decisions, so Christians everywhere can improve and strengthen their walk with Christ through biblical stewardship. Before we get started, we just wanted you to know that the topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investing and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities and advisory services are offered through Genuous Wealth Management, member FINRA and SIPC. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Tim Russell and Drew Gysi.
I'm Tim Russell.
And I'm Pastor Drew Gysi.
And we welcome you to episode 107 of
the Stewardology Podcast. Well, in our last episode, we addressed the forgiveness of student loans through President Biden's loan forgiveness program. And if you have not listened to that episode, please go back. I think it'll be a good foundation for coming into this episode.
Episode 106.
Yes. But today we're going to be talking about the student loan crisis as a whole and examining it and, about taking student loans. Is it really worth the cost?
Yeah. Well, so we talked about a student loan crisis. The very fact that student loans are such a burden to borrowers that the administration felt that they had to forgive any amount of student loans is an indication that it is a big problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it's a crisis.
It is a crisis.
It's impacting so many people. So our episode today, we're going to touch on various areas. We're going to look at the promise of college, a history of student loans, the problem of student loans, which we're actually going to do a little movie review. I don't know. I think get your popcorn ready and we can talk. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to get some personal introspection with student loans. We're going to look at stewardship principles to consider before getting student loans and also stewardship principles and how to pay back your student loans. So our goal is not to ramble in this episode, but to get you some good, clear, and defined points for processing and hopefully some good, solid biblical wisdom pertaining to student loans and decide, is it really worth it? Personally, I've had many people ask me questions about student loans, and the conversations were all over the map from this is my only way to get an education to we need to change our plans immediately and not get into student loan debt. Today, we're going to take a little bit of this and make it a roundtable discussion. We've asked our producer extraordinaire, Tyler, to come on and join us because he has some firsthand knowledge and understanding of student loans. So in order to get ourselves going, we got to jump right in here. We got a lot of ground to cover. So first and foremost, Tim, talk about the promise of college. We have three promises there.
Why student loans are a problem? Because college is so attractive, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of good things that people get from college. So the first promise is that, hey, look, education is something that everyone who aspires to it should be able to achieve regardless of economic income. Now, this is not a promise that I'm making, right? This is generally in the American zeitgeist, if that's a term that you're familiar with.
Interesting.
In the American consciousness, the way that we think about things, generally speaking, it is assumed that college should be available to everyone regardless of economic input or income, that student loans are for enabling anyone who wants a degree to get a degree. That's where student loans are coming into the picture. The second promise is that if you get a degree, you are going to be happier, better paid than those without a college degree. In fact, the more education you have, the more earning potential you have.
Yeah, it's the promise is that it's like a ticket to the American dream, right?
That's the idea.
That's
right?
well said.
I want the nice car, the flashy house, the flashy car, nice house. Oh, the nice vacations. I want all of those things because at the end of the day, I want to enjoy the life that I have. That's the American dream. However, the American dream turns into a nightmare. And we're going to talk about how that happens in just a minute. So I have a couple of statistics here. You may accept or not accept these statistics, but they do come from the government. Essentially, an individual who has less than a high school diploma. This is an individual who has not graduated from high school. The average weekly earnings of that person is $520 a week. That equates to roughly $26,000 a year.
That's hard to live off of.
It is very hard to live off of. Now, if you look at someone with a bachelor's degree, that's a kind of like a four-year college degree.
For some people, maybe 7 years.
Their income goes from the $520 to $1,173 a week, or $61,000 a year. Mm-hmm. Interesting. If you look at even greater degrees, like a professional degree, like that would be a doctor, someone who's in the medical profession, or radiologist, things like that. The average weekly or the median weekly income is $1,800 a week.
Substantial increase.
It is. So, and if you have a high school diploma, I said if you had less than a high school diploma, it's only $520. If you have a high school diploma, it's like $712. So it's clear that with more education, the opportunities for income go up.
So that promise that you stated, promise number 2, if you get a degree, you're going to be happier and better paid. There's some truth to that you will be better paid.
Yes. Now, and what's also interesting is if you look at the unemployment rates based on those same education levels, if you are in the lowest level of education, less than a high school degree, the unemployment rate is 6.5. Remember, the current unemployment rate is somewhere around 3.6.
Double.
Double. If you look at the highest levels of education, the unemployment rate's only 1.5.
That's interesting.
So it's substantially better off, even in economically difficult times, if you have more education. You're more likely to have a job or get a job.
Interesting. So, Tim, what's our third promise that we see?
Oh, college years are ones that young adults should not miss. They need to experience all the things that they can to be the most well-rounded adults with great stories and strong relationships. Common experiences like, drugs, sex, alcohol, all the parties.
Tim, I sensed a little tongue-in-cheek as you were speaking about all that stuff.
Honestly, you talk to a bunch of high school students and they're thinking about college. They're not thinking about sitting in a lecture hall taking notes. They're thinking about spring break down at Daytona Beach.
Yeah.
Right? The pictures they see on the news with all the craziness.
I have had conversations in my years of ministry with parents and students saying, well, they need the experience. I need the experience. Tim, it's a costly experience.
Financially and morally.
Well said.
Yeah. So the other we talk about the promise. I think maybe another hidden promise is that, especially when we're going to secular universities, public institutions, there is a hidden promise that we are going to inculcate your children in our secular, godless way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And that is another dangerous element to just be aware of as a parent. Mm-hmm. There is a current that is pulling our children away from Christ.
Yeah. I would probably say that if I could go back and do things over again, I would probably have steered my kids toward a Christian university, a Christian college. Not that it destroyed them, but I think it impacted them and got them thinking differently than what I would have wanted. But we sent them in with a good foundation, and I trust God that He's going to do an amazing work in the upcoming days. But I agree with you, Tim. That's well said.
So let's talk about student loan history. So we know that college is great. We can make more income. So how does student loans fit into the picture? The first thing I've got to recognize is that 1958, the National Defense Education Act was passed. And that's the first act that allowed student loans to take place. Let me give you a bit of the context. We were in the middle of maybe early part of the Cold War, right? The USSR had just successfully launched the Sputnik satellite.
Ooh,
they were winning the space race. The American country, the whole system was educationally, technologically behind the Russians. And this was unacceptable because if the Russians can advance into space, they can get an advantage over America and our nuclear weapons, and we all might be at risk. So Congress, in their infinite wisdom, passed this legislation to incentivize more students to get into the educational environment so we can have better degrees, better educated students, which would provide greater technology, more advancement, and give us the edge against our enemies. Interestingly, did you know this? The first loans that were offered had a max of $1,000 per borrower.
I did not know
that. It
that.
is a long distance from where we are today.
You know what's interesting? I just, as you were talking, Tim, did that old Google machine here.
Yeah.
And that $1,958,000 equivalent to today is $10,251.76.
Interesting.
I thought that would be an interesting stat to throw out there.
All right. So continuing on, in 1965, we had some new legislation that made student loans even more accessible. And then shortly thereafter, we had Sallie Mae. That was established in 1973.
Yeah.
Does anyone know what Sallie Mae stands for?
I just learned the other week, Tim.
Tell me, what does Sallie Mae stand for?
Student Loan Marketing Association.
Ha!
Did I emphasize a word? I think I did.
So what is Sallie Mae? Why does it exist, right? It exists primarily to create, service, and collect private educational loans. Well, private and federal. In fact, it was established to do the federal. It's moved into the private, and it's doing even more things today. An interesting side note, in 2014, Sallie Mae spun off its loan servicing division and most of its loan portfolio into a separate publicly traded company called Navient Corporation. Navient is the largest servicer of federal student loans and acts as a collector on behalf of the Department of Education. Does anyone know, I'm curious about Tyler, anyone know anything interesting about Navient? They have been dinged big time for fraudulent practices, unethical standards, and the way that they lie to, manipulate, and abuse their borrowers.
I had no idea.
They're a nasty little organization, and they came from Sallie Mae.
Wow.
We just love Navient.
Well, that was a good big picture of the history of student loans, and I thought that would be good for us to have. Well, let's take a look at the problem of student loans.
Yeah.
So student loan debt has topped $1.5 trillion in recent years, making it the largest type of consumer debt outstanding other than mortgages that people have.
Yeah.
The average student loan borrower graduates, and this is undergrad, with about $30,000 in debt.
Yeah.
So
one of the financial advisors with whom I work, his name is Mark. He went to college. He spent about $20,000 to go to college, and his starting salary, his first job out of college, starting salary was somewhere around $40,000. So it cost him $20,000 for 4 years. Mm-hmm. His starting salary was $40,000, $50,000, somewhere in that ballpark.
Somewhere around there.
Look, the ratio of cost versus potential income benefit has skewed dramatically. You've got people walking out, and if the average is 30, we got so many people walking out with 6 digits of debt who have mortgage-sized debt, and they're entering jobs that are still, how many years later, making $30,000 to $40,000 to $50,000
starting salary.
Huge amount of debt load that they're carrying. So the income to debt ratio has skewed hugely in the last number of years.
Yeah. So we want to now take a look at this problem of student loans. Tim, You learned about a movie.
Well, yeah. So let me first of all say that there is another podcast that's from the Ramsey world, and love him or hate him, the Ramsey world does have some very helpful things. There's a podcast series called Borrowed Futures. And I found it to be tremendously eye-opening in understanding what's happening and how it impacts individual students and borrowers. They then turned that podcast into an actual documentary. So it's called Borrow Futures. You can rent it on all of the streaming platforms. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this whole student loan topic, if you've got students who are thinking about going off to college and wondering how to pay, I would strongly urge you to spend like the $2.99 to rent that movie. Take a look at it. I think you're going to be greatly benefited by the context and the awareness of some of the things that are happening within this industry.
I'm going to go a step further. Instead of renting it, may I recommend do the purchase of it on the streaming service. Husband and wife, if you're married, sit down, watch it, discuss it, and later on, one by one, bring the kids in and let them watch it with you. I think that would be of great benefit in that. So let's take some time and let's talk about here. Tim, you thought it was so important that you encouraged the entire team here at Life Financial, at Stewardology, and Life Institute to hit the brakes, to have a lunch meeting and watch this movie together. Why was it so important, Tim?
Well, I think that as a Christian financial planning world, we need to be aware of some of the major financial factors that are facing so many people, and why, frankly, so many young folks are having a hard time being able to get their feet under them to be able to start saving and investing and preparing for the future. Yeah. From a financial advisor perspective, I'm actually worried about the future because so many of the people that need to be saving and investing for retirement, because Social Security is going to be vastly different for them than it is for most people approaching retirement today.
True.
They need to be more self-reliant and independent, which means they need to be saving and investing today to allow compound interest to work for them.
Well said.
And they're unable to do it because they are under such a crushing debt load that they can't make progress. So we need to understand it so that we can speak to it, so that we can be helpful to those who are suffering with this situation.
And Tim, it was very helpful. So I'd like us to kind of like bring Tyler in, and Tim, you, all three of us, kind of like do a roundtable of some of the things that we gleaned, some of the phrases, quotes, and things that we felt and learned from this film.
Let's talk about Borrowed Futures. And I would again, I encourage you to go out and take a look at it.
One of the things that I knew but yet relearned, they said there that this is one of, if not the most important financial decision that one can make, and that is,
it's certainly the first biggest
for a 17, 18, 19-year-old to take on such amazing debt.
Well, yeah, it's a huge decision to make so early in life. You know, Tim, you just mentioned that you're concerned about people being able to save for the future. And one of the terms we love to use here is compound interest, right?
Well said.
So being able to invest early, right? Compound interest can work for you over time, especially when you're consistent with things. But if you go into debt at 17, 18 years old, and then you have compound interest working against you, you know, that it's a vastly important financial decision because it's a huge expense, number one, but now it has the longest time horizon to just grow to unbearable amounts, you know, with that interest. It's doing the exact opposite of what investing should do for you. You know, it's debt that's growing to a monster.
Yeah. So you know what the average cost of college is these days?
I just saw something the other day.
So if you go to a private college, we're looking at almost $40,000 a year.
Private.
So 4 years at $40,000. Do the math. We're talking about $160,000 for a 4-year degree. If you're looking at an out-of-state school, public school, we're maybe looking at $23,000. And for in-state residences, public colleges, it's actually $10,000. So it can be more affordable to go to a in-state public school than a private out-of-state school.
Tim, I just got a report this morning. U.S. News and World Report came up with their top colleges to go to.
Yeah.
And in their top 20 that they have, the average per year is just around $55,000 a year.
Isn't that amazing?
The average of 20. So some are way high, some are way low, but that's of your top 20. So just an interesting stat to kind of bring the light there when it comes to the cost. One of the things that I learned since my kids are now a few years removed from college, that education is a brand. It's a label. Now, it's been that way for many years. My wife is an Ivy League graduate. That Ivy League bumper sticker was part of what gravitated her toward there. Plus also she's very intelligent. She wanted to have the challenge of education, which she did get there. But it is that bumper sticker that's there. And it's a brand, it's a label. It's like Gysi and all these other fancy clothings that are out there. So, Tyler.
That's probably why so many of us forget about the community colleges, right? We say community colleges are a great way to get an education that's affordable, right? You can get a degree that's pretty much the same as a 4-year college for a quarter of the price, but they're not the brand that I want. Right. So we kind of ignore them, and
you don't get the experiences in the football team and all of that.
We pay for it later. Yeah.
Well, so you talk about brand. What I think you need to know is, again, I'm a financial advisor, so I think in financial terms. One financial term that comes to mind is ROI. ROI stands for return on investment.
Yes.
So you go to a school that is top notch, top tier, at all the amenities, right? All the latest gyms, the best fitness center, the nicest food. You're paying $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 a year for this top tier school. If you go to another school that doesn't have all of the little amenities, however, has just as quality in education, just as solid teachers, the cost may be $20,000. You look at the total right? ROI is return on investment. The investment that you're making, the differential, we could be looking at $40,000 to $80,000 on the one level, or hundreds of $1,000s on the other.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to get a job which has that substantially higher of an income to justify that expense, that investment? The answer is oftentimes no.
Correct.
And not just no, it's no, not at all. Sorry for blowing out your ears.
Well, it's so true, because when you're 18 years old, right, and you decide to go to your brand school, right, the one that you want, you're not thinking about the return on investment. You're thinking of it in terms of free money, right? Like, this is money I'm not really seeing, and it's paying for what I want to do, and I'm not really processing it. And then, then comes reckoning day. 6 months after graduation, you have to start paying it back. Day. But yeah, like, we're not. That's why I'm glad we do this podcast, because we can encourage people to think about the I, right, and the return.
Yes,
and really get people thinking about that before they sign on that dotted line.
So some of the suggestions that they had in this Borrowed Future documentary is, number one, apply for scholarships. Apply for as many scholarships as you can. If you're a student in high school, that should be your job. Your job should be applying for as many scholarships as you can throughout your sophomore, junior, senior year. And there are many individuals who have gotten significant discounts on their college expenses through diligent use of student scholarships, right, by filling out those things. And what you would do is you would work with your guidance counselor, your English teacher, and draft a couple of essays, because you really only need a handful of essays. All of the scholarships ask for some kind of an essay, some kind of a story, and you work with them, craft a really solid essay, and then you just use that on all of those things. So you put in some time up front, and then you just copy and paste in some of these applications, enter the data you need to do. It could have a huge return on your time investment.
I just had this conversation with one of my friends a week ago Wednesday. A bunch of us guys were talking, and his daughter's 11th grade next year, going to be going to college.
Yeah.
And they're scared.
Yeah.
He's going to be sitting down watching the movie. But I told him, I said, she's got a year.
Yeah.
Scholarships. She needs to put a lot of focus on getting scholarships.
The second thing that they say is just make student loans not an option. Just commit to do a school in an economically affordable way. So you do scholarships, then you focus on working your tail off, because when you have sweat equity in it, that's always good. If your parents going to help with some tuition, great. You put in some sweat equity of your own as a student. Work during school, work in the summers, make up some money as much as you can, and that creates ingenuity.
Yeah.
That creates an entrepreneurial spirit. That creates the opportunity for you to make some even better life lessons, connections, and growth personally and professionally that are going to pay huge dividends down the line, because you have practical work experience, not just behind the book theoretical knowledge that you'll get at college. Now, college, again, I'm not disrespecting theoretical knowledge and the benefit of education. You need it, but you also need boots on the ground experience, actually working, actually learning how to market yourself and promote what you do, to actually do the work to provide value for people who are willing to show their appreciation in dollar bills.
I think that's well said. My son, who is a CPA and controller for a company, I believe it was in his junior year or maybe before that, he decided he needed to get a job, and he got something within his framework of financial aspects. He wound up getting a position. They liked him so much that they hooked him up with a computer and set up where he was able to do a little bit of work while he was at school. So they enjoyed him so much. And then during the summer, right before his senior year, they put an offer before him that when you graduate, we want you on board. What a nice piece that was for him. And he was with them for many years before he jumped ship to go to this other company. So that is
really valuable.
It was very valuable for him. You know, one of the things I wanted to bring up also that was mentioned in the movie, and that's this person said 12 years after borrowing, the average borrower only paid off 34% of their student loan. I did a simple math. That puts the person in their mid-50s. I'm just above my mid-50s. And they were just maybe getting their student loans paid off. I can't even imagine that for this generation that is now coming through this right now. The change that this is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, the American dream, like we mentioned earlier, used to be the, white picket fence mentality, but the American dream has seemingly shifted to, I just want to pay off these loans. That's what it's gotten to. And I at some point here soon, I do want to share some personal introspections from this film with you guys that I think would be helpful perhaps for this discussion. But
before we get there, I do want to say the trades, getting into actual various trades, whether it's electrician, plumbing, carpentry,
auto mechanics,
welding, auto mechanics. There are some really, really good jobs.
Yeah.
That don't require a 4-year college degree. That's more tactile and hands-on. So don't underestimate or undervalue the benefit of some form of a trade.
I think that's critical. One of the things I wanted to bring up that they did talk about in the movie was parents and grandparents, if they co-sign, they're on the hook. If the child defaults, now what's going to happen is the parent or grandparent is now responsible for that money, and it's can very much so radically change their life.
Yes.
And I think it's very important that they know and they understand that. And Tyler, you said it so well. Most of the mistakes of college debt is simply college choice. That's a key piece.
It's college choice, and it's also it's ignorance of the financial
Well
implications.
said. Good.
Ignorance.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to insult anyone. I'm trying to say you're some ignoramus, but it's a fact.
Yeah. And Tyler, why don't you talk about this next one about many young people are uninformed and misinformed. You and I spoke to a high school class within the last couple months and shared with them a little bit about your journey, about financial stewardship. And part of that is being uninformed or misinformed.
Well, yeah. And young people, they go through their high school careers with these promises we talked about earlier, right? That it's a college degree is a gateway to the American dream, that you're going to have all these experiences that you need to have to be a well-rounded adult. And these kids buy into that fully, right? Their brains aren't fully developed to think about all of these things from all these different angles. And they're just buying and eating up what people are telling them. So they're misinformed. They haven't been taught about the financial ramifications of these things. In the documentary, there was, I think he was a school teacher who, man, I just resonated with. He got his diploma in the mail, and he purposely doesn't display it because every time he walks past it, he just puts his head down in shame. And not because he got a degree. In fact, the degree was actually useful for him. It got him the career that he wanted to, but because of the debt load that it brought him and the fact that he was unable to provide for his family in the way that he wanted to because his income is owned by someone else, right? It's owned by a bank. And
borrower, slave to lender.
Yeah. And man, I just, a lot of school systems, at least from when I came through, it's like they're grooming children to take on a massive debt for a degree that might just collect dust, and you angrily walk past it every day, and it's going to be tough. And then just like with the school teacher, right, if the degree is useful, right, it actually achieved its purpose, there's a good chance that the cost is not worth the return, though there's nuance here, right? He was a school teacher, he was a coach, he was making money, but it still wasn't good enough to pay back the loan at the interest rate it was at. And of course, there's nuance. There's careers that are worth perhaps maybe taking on some debt. But man, a lot of the times it just doesn't seem like it actually works that way.
Yeah.
We want to encourage you. Take some time, rent it or purchase it, watch this film. I do want to bring one little caveat to it. There's sensationalism in there. I want that to be made known. And I think the sensationalism is good. It causes you to process and think. So don't write it off right away if you're sensitive to that. My wife is, and that's not a bad thing. She picked up on that right away, and it kind of turned her off. But don't let that turn you off from the information that they are trying to get across, which is well done.
Yeah, I also would say, look, we're not anti-college.
No.
Actually, we're all in this room. We're all college graduates.
Yes.
We loved our college experience. We think that college is great. We think what we need to do, what parents, what children, what students need to do is to be more intentional.
Well said.
Deliberate and discerning about the college choices that they make.
And how they fund it.
Yeah, I think that again, what's happening in many of the universities today is an arms race for amenities and the nicest, the best things, all in the name of getting a better rating on the U.S. News and World Report college standing.
Yeah.
So they can attract more students and pay a higher tuition. That should not be your goal, to go to the nicest, newest, finest, shiniest college. You need to you need to be utilitarian about your college choices. What do I want to do? What is my desired end result? I want a job in this industry doing this thing. Let's look at what colleges will actually help us to get there in an affordable way.
Yeah, there was a study by Ramsey Solutions actually that found that 53% of those who took out student loans to pay for school actually regret doing so, which it seems interesting that it's only that much. But 71% of those who took out student loans say they wish they'd been better educated about that debt before taking it on.
So let's transition on over to some stewardship principles to consider before getting student loans. We may have touched on a few of them, but Tim, what's our first one?
Consider applying for a lot of scholarships. I said this earlier, scholarships are your friend. Parents, encourage your children, your students in high school to start looking for scholarships and working on essays. Those are the two big jobs that they need to be fulfilling. In fact, they'll probably make more from scholarships than they would have for the same hourly rate flipping burgers down the street.
Well said, well said. And consider working 1, 2, or more jobs to save for your education.
Yeah, it almost sounds like from speaking from both sides of our mouth. Work on scholarships, don't prioritize work, but at the same time, you still need to work, right?
Yeah.
So let's get the scholarships, let's focus on that. But when you're able to, still continue to work, continue to save up, both for the students and for the parents. Being prepared for it.
I was talking about this with my friend Chris. So shout out to you. I'm sure you're listening. And Chris was telling me that when he was in high school, he worked all summer long at a moving company where he would just carry and move people, put stuff in the tractor trailers. And he was to save all his money for college. His parents said, "You're saving it for college." And he even did it through some of his college days. His parents made, "Put your money away for college," everything. It was everything. And it was difficult for him. But he then, in turn, told me, he said, after I graduated, even though I had all that money saved up and my dad and my mom used that to pay for my education along the way, he still had 11 years of payments after he graduated to be able to put everything behind him.
Yeah, and that's when tuitions were lower.
Much lower.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the documentary, there was a kid that he kind of did a little bit of both of this, right? He went to a community college, so the cost of education was a lot cheaper, but he applied for scholarships as if it was his full-time job, and he sold, what was it, like lawnmowers?
Lawnmowers. He bought and repaired and sold lawnmowers.
So
love that.
When he walked across that stage and got his diploma, I think it took him a little longer than 4 years to get the diploma. It might have taken him 5 or 6, but he walked across that stage debt-free.
Paid in full.
Can you just imagine the sense of pride? And I'm not saying this in a sinful way, but like satisfaction, like I put in the work. God bless the effort, and I'm debt-free.
Yeah. I can say that because that was my story with my wife and I. I didn't start school till after I was married, and we worked hard. We got not much money come in from scholarships, grants, and everything. No student loans. It was cash.
So let's get back to our principles. These are for people looking to go to college and considering student loans. Apply for scholarships and grants. Continue working other jobs. Thirdly, consider community colleges, which can help keep expenses low. We've kind of gone over that a couple times. Avoid the brand name schools. The fourth recommendation, the fourth principle we like you to consider is remember that the borrower is slave to the lender.
We say that often around here, don't we?
Loans, student loans, they're not bankruptable. That changes in the American dream is just getting to the point of paying off the loan, right? The American dream is no longer the white picket fence. The American dream is, I just want to pay off the stupid loans.
Yeah.
How sad is that?
So we want to encourage people, do not become that financial quote unquote slave to someone for a good portion of your adult life.
Yeah.
And another thing is borrowing money can demonstrate a lack of faith that God will provide.
I think this is an important one.
So God may have had other ways or means to meet your need, and you may be missing that great blessing from God. Matthew 6:31 through 33. Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing? For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you.
Yeah.
God knows what your needs are. He knows how to provide for you much better than your parents know how to provide for you. I think it's important to allow God to step in and step through to provide. Personally, in my undergrad years, again, I did not start college until after I was married, 6 months after I got married. And if I could go back and calculate it, I'm going to say roughly a quarter to a third of my undergraduate education was funded by financial gifts that were given to my wife and I, that people believed in what we were doing, that we were working towards ministry, pastoral ministry. These people invested in me. And there were times where my wife and I looked at each other. It's like, how are we going to pay this bill? How is this going to happen?
Yeah.
And God stepped through the graciousness of somebody else And their investment, this 31, 36 years ago, is still paying off as I get the joy of working with the Life Institute, being part of this podcast. So their investment has had decades of return on investment.
So let's review. The fifth principle that we want you to be aware of is that borrowing money can demonstrate a lack of faith, that borrowing money can prevent God from providing in miraculous ways.
Amen. Amen.
That this is potentially shortcutting something that God has planned to build your faith in. So be aware of that. And that's not to say that every time you borrow money, it's a sin. I'm just saying there may be ways in which we're missing a blessing. The sixth principle is borrowing money must always, always, always make economic sense.
Did you say always?
Yeah. If you have a starting salary of $35,000 and you're walking out of college with $100,000 of debt, does that make economic sense? No.
Not one bit.
I mean, I've met people who have not 100, but maybe $60,000 in their early childhood education making $25,000 a year. Mm-hmm. I really struggle. If you're going to go into Christian education, if you're going to go into the mission field, do not finance your education, especially if you're going into some kind of a Christian ministry environment. Your debt is going to limit or prevent you from being useful to God's work because you have so much more income you need to pay off your debt.
I know a couple of mission organizations that will not bring people on when they have high student loan debt.
Yeah.
They will not permit them to be part of their team until they take care of that. So that kind of squelches what they've been striving for.
Sure. Then the final principle for people looking to get into college is that whenever we borrow money, we mortgage the future to pay for the present. So said another way, we always mortgage the future when we borrow money. Mm-hmm. We're committing ourselves to hundreds or thousands of dollars in monthly payments for decades. In some cases, these payments are mortgage-sized payments. And, look, this is not an exaggeration.
No.
We really do commit ourselves to all these future payments, and that prevents us from doing whatever God may be calling us to do in the future with our finances and with our lives because we have these commitments that we've made years in the past.
Yeah, so that's important that they choose to not mortgage the future. Yeah. Because you will have to pay some or all of that back.
So remember to go to our show notes to get a full list of some of these principles. Let's talk about someone who's already borrowed the money. Now they've got to pay it back. What are some principles they should consider?
Yeah. What's our first one, Tim?
Well, pay back your loans, right? Again, see the last episode. We talked about debt forgiveness and paying back your loans with debt forgiveness. Maybe the thumbnail version of that is if you have debt forgiveness, it's okay to accept it. You still have to pay back what's owed. But if you have $10,000 forgiven, praise Jesus, let's move into a more financially sound position.
And Tim, you mentioned last episode that if they get to forgiveness, build up cash reserves and pay off those high interest credit card debts and before you allocate your money to the rest of those student loans, right? Mm-hmm. Am I correct in saying that?
That's the idea.
So that's what you need to do. I think the other thing to help...
The second principle
in paying back student loans is budget.
Yeah.
Make budgeting a way of life. Make it your lifestyle, part of your DNA moving forward. To go to our previous episodes on stewardologypodcast.com, you can look. We have quite a few episodes on budgeting, and listen well, repeat it well. We have some stuff on our website that you can download that can help you with those budgeting aspects. This is going to be a game changer for you. In the process of paying it back, you're going to see where your money's going, and you'll be able to redirect and change, delete things that you shouldn't be putting money towards and putting it towards the things that you need to. So very important. Budgeting makes sense. It makes financial sense, and it makes biblical sense.
So thirdly, make a choice now. That's today, that you will live on less than you earn, right? That's the secret to stewardship, to becoming financially independent. I mean, the whole point is if you make $10,000 a month, live on $8,000 a month. If you make $3,000 a month, live on $2,500 a month. You need to live on less than you earn. Again, I understand that if you are making a small amount of income, it's even harder to do that.
Sure.
So work diligently and make sure that you're not going into credit card debt. We have to live within our means.
And if you do that, if you live off of less than you earned,
Gives you margin.
Yeah, it gives you margin, and you have that emergency fund. You can now start knocking down that debt in a more aggressive way.
Guys, I know that for some of you, it sounds like pie in the sky to live on less than you earn. That is the goal. I don't know where you're at today. You may be living on more than you earn, but you as a steward must be very diligent with your budget to make sure that you're living on your income and able to make progress.
And if you're looking for resources on that, we actually have 2 different episodes that we've done in the past. One of them is how do you decrease your expenses?
Yeah.
And then the other one is how do you increase your income? Yeah. So those are 2 factors into living on less than you earn.
Yeah. Yeah. Rocket science, right? All right. And then, so our fourth principle here is don't let your expanding income cause your lifestyle to bloat while you're attacking your debt. Get aggressive towards paying down your debt. It's so easy as we have our income expanding, as we work and get promotions and raises, that we can say, hey, I can kick back and relax and take my foot off the gas pedal. I can let my lifestyle expand. And certain amount of that, like, I understand. But from a financial perspective, this is the best opportunity for living on less than you earn, allocating those extra dollars towards getting you in a financial position where you can really start to make some progress in your stewardship journey.
And our final one is, we mentioned this earlier multiple times in last episode, get an emergency fund.
So important.
Build it up. Prevent future debt when emergencies strike. I think it's a very important piece that we all do, whether you're in student loan debt or not. Have that emergency fund ready and available. So we want to kind of bring in some closing application points. First of all, pray. Seek the Lord about taking out student loans or how best to make repayment on them. So come before the Lord, talk to him about it, but don't do it without the Lord involved. So take some time and pray. Student loans or not, God cares for and provides for his children. Also, think about student loan debt before you sign on the dotted loan. Process it, think it, come up with different options and plans, but just don't sign on the dotted line without processing and thinking and praying about it. Realize that many people are crippled today financially due to poor financial planning with their student loans. It doesn't mean that you need to jump in with everybody else. So realize that there is great truth to this, and choose to, if you can, to not be one of those statistics where a large portion of your future income will be used to pay down what you borrowed to get there with much interest. Pray again that the Lord of the harvest will be your great sustainer and provide whether you have or are contemplating student loans. And as parents and grandparents, don't get roped into co-signing for a student loan and mortgaging your future if there are some financial hardships that your children and grandchildren may have in paying them back. So use great wisdom. Love your children, but loving them does not mean that you have to sign on the dotted line for them.
All right. Until next time, we thank you for joining us here with the Stewardology Podcast. Send your questions to our website, stewardologypodcast.com/ideas. This episode, our previous episode, are direct results of your feedback at that part on our website. Take advantage of your free stewardship review. You're trying to figure out how to deal with your student loans, what to do, how to make progress. The stewardship review is designed to help with this and more circumstances. And remember to like and review us on your podcast catcher. Brothers and sisters, until next time, God bless And please urge and encourage the ones you love to minimize and avoid student loans.
Thank you for joining us on the Stewardology Podcast, where financial stewardship and theology meet. We'd like to help you take your next steps in biblical financial stewardship. First, subscribe in your podcast provider to get the newest episode delivered to you every week. Next, follow us on social media and visit our website at stewardologypodcast.com. There you can find our social media links and our entire episode archive. Remember, some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. See you next week on the Stewardology Podcast. Securities and advisory services offered through Genios Wealth Management, member FINRA and SIPC.